Welcome back to Zero Lab. Today we are going to be taking a look at Lugia VSTAR in the post-rotation Temporal Forces meta. Lugia VSTAR has been a very strong card ever since its release in Silver Tempest. It dominated the meta until rotation of that season, and then we saw it change a little bit into the single strike Lugia deck that was very good for a little while. But ever since Charizard EX's release and the Paradox Rift format, Lugia V-Star hasn't been very strong, but all that may change going into Temporal Forces. Now, Lugia does lose some important pieces that we'll talk about to the rotation, but it gains some very strong cards from the Temporal Forces set and seems to be positioned pretty well going into this upcoming format as we head into EUIC. So first we're going to be taking a look at the list that won the Champions League Fukuoka over in Japan. So this is the list that won over in Japan. The first thing you'll notice is there is another stage 1 line in the deck that is brand new. We have this Minccino and the Cinccino. The Cinccino is really the big card that Lugia gains from the Temporal Forces set. The Cinccino's attack for colorless does 70 damage times the amount of special energy cards attached to it. And so that means special energy cards. So double turbo energy still only counts as 1 energy. And with the minus 20 damage from the double turbo energies text, that would add 50 damage to the Cinccino's attack. So essentially with 4 special energies attached to the Cinccino, if none of them are double turbo energies, it can do 280 damage. And with 5 special energies attached, it can do 350 damage. So this is the new big one-hit KO potential in this Lugia V-Star deck. But let's jump back to the start. We have obviously the 4-3 Lugia V-Star line, which has been pretty common. 4 of Archeops. We need 4 Archeops for prizing reasons, and we need to get them into our hand to discard them. So obviously going to play 4 Archeops. And then we're playing a 3-3 line of this Minccino and Cinccino from the Temporal Forces set. Now, one thing to note is the Minccino is actually pretty good as well, as it does have that call for family attack. If you go second, you can attach an energy to it, and you can call for family and get 2 basics onto your bench. So if you weren't able to find your Lugia V or had to utilize your ball search to discard Archeops, you can still call for family to get Lugia V into play turn 1. Then we also have 2 of the Unfazed Fat Snorlax, which is just historically a very strong single prize attacker, and 1 Lumineon V for consistency. So this is the Pokemon lineup. A couple things to call out that is interesting. This is somewhat similar to the colorless Lugia deck that we saw built in maybe the Obsidian Flames format when Mew EX was released in Pokemon 151. But we do not see the Radiant Charizard or the Luxray, which were important inclusions in that colorless Lugia deck. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One of them is space issues with the Cinccino, where we have a 3-3 line of another evolution line, so we have a lot of deck space taken up by that. And we're playing 17 special energies. We'll get to that in a moment. So deck space is pretty limited in this version of Lugia. And on top of that, if you can get these Cinccinos going, you really don't need the Radiant Charizard. You don't need the Luxray. They have massive one-hit KO potential and still only give up a single prize. Now, looking at the supporter lineup, we have 3 Iono, 2 Professor's Research, 2 Boss's Orders, 2 Serenas, and a Jacques. So one of the big cards that Lugia loses to rotation is that Professor Burnett, which allowed us to search our deck for any 2 cards and put them into our discard pile, which was a great way of getting Archeops into the discard pile. Now that we've lost that card, there is a 1 of Jacques in this list, and Jacques can play a couple of different roles. One, it can obviously get 2 Archeops to your hand, and then you can Ultra Ball them away or Read the Wind, or whatever way you're going to use to discard those Archeops. But it also finds you your Lugia V-Star and your Cinccinos. So later in the game, even if you've already established the double Archeops, it is still finding important evolution Pokemon for you, like the Cinccinos. Serena, obviously a good gusting option on Pokemon Vs if Arceus V is good. Lugia VSTAR is good. We're seeing Giratina VSTAR still do well. And there's obviously Rotom Vs in things like Charizard EX decks. So there's still enough V Pokemon around that Serena can still be an important gusting option, but it is also a consistency card because it allows you to discard cards from your hand, which is just another way to get these Archeops into the discard pile. And that's one of the difficult things for Lugia V-Star in this post-rotation meta is consistently getting that turn 2 double Archeops in the discard pile to use that summoning star V-Star power and bring them back to your bench. This is probably the least consistent Lugia has ever been at getting that done now that we don't have Evolution Incense, we don't have Quick Ball, we don't have Professor Burnett, so it's a lot harder to do now. But when we get to the energy lineup, we can talk about some ways that that might not matter as much for this deck. Looking at the ball search, we have 4 Ultra Ball, 4 Capturing Aroma, 2 Great Ball, and a Master Ball. I think prior to this, when we had the Professor Burnett, those Great Balls were Nest Balls, just to more consistently get your Lugia V down turn 1. But now you really need to dig for those Archeops, so Great Ball I think is a great replacement for that. And then for our A-Spec, we are playing the Master Ball in this deck. So Master Ball can find you any Pokemon you want. It can find you your Lumineon, it can find you an Archeops to discard, it can find you your Lugia V-Star. And it seems to be one of the better A-Specs to play in this deck. Now, if you feel that the deck can set up consistently enough without the Master Ball, I do think that Prime Catcher is probably the other A-Spec that you would consider in Lugia. But this list from the Champions League, Fukuoka did play the Master Ball, and with how hard it is to get the Archeops, I do think that the Master Ball is the way to go because this deck is strong enough once you do get that set up. On top of that, we do play 2 Collapse Stadium, so it's a way to get 2 prizers off of your board, like the Lumineon, or like Lugia if you, say, for example, were forced to bench 2 Lugia in case your opponent knocked out one on their next turn before you could V-Star. Maybe you can collapse away that second Lugia if you don't want another 2 prizer in play. Then we play 4 Double Turbo Energy, 4 Jet Energy, 4 Gift Energy, 3 Mist Energy, 1 Therapeutic Energy, and 1 V-Guard Energy. One of the cool things about Lugia going into the next format, one is the 4 Gift Energy just gives you a lot of consistency. And when you set up a Cinccino with 5 energy on it and it's doing 350, 330 damage, really depending on how many Double Turbo Energies are attached to it, your opponent can't really gust around that threat. They have to KO it. And so you're always triggering your gift energies, which allows you to draw more cards and make the deck more consistent in the late game to find maybe those bosses orders that you need. The other thing is the jet energies are very nice because you can't have things trapped in the active spot. So Lugia theoretically should have a very good stall or control matchup as well with those 4 jet energies. And the fact that basically everything except the Lumineon in the deck can attack. And then you have the 3 Mist Energies. Mist Energy can block Sableye, Lost Mine. It can block Giratina V-Star's V-Star attack. It can block the Roaring Moon's Frenzied Gouging. All those sorts of things. So Mist Energy, a very good card to have in here as well. Therapeutic Energy obviously allows Snorlax to not fall asleep when it uses its Thumping Snore attack. And then V-Guard Energy just protects you from the Pokemon's attacks. For example, your Lugia V-Star can't be one-shot by Giratina V-Star's 280 damage attack when it has a V-Guard attached. So this is the list that won the Champions League Fukuoka, and we talked about how it might not be as consistent to getting to the turn 2 V-Star in this format because of the loss of things like Professor Burnett. And that's certainly true, but one of the things that's interesting about this deck is both your Snorlax and your Cinccinos can attack for 2 energy. Cinccino can attack for any 2 energy and do 140 damage, so it can take a single prize knockout. And the Snorlax can attack for a double turbo energy and any other energy and attack for 160. So because of that, you do have some attacks you can do before you get your Archeops out. Let's say you attach an energy to a double turbo energy to Snorlax turn 1, and then you jet energy it into the active on the following turn, or just attach another energy to it if it was already in the active position. And then you can be attacking on your turn 2 before you've even V-started if you weren't able to get your Archeops out yet. So the deck can attack before you use Summoning Star, which is very nice because it can take till turn 3, turn 4 if you're really unlucky to get double Archeops in the discard pile before you want to use that Summoning Star attack. Now, would I play this list as is into the next format? Personally, I would make a couple of changes to this list, although I do think Lugia is very strong going into the next format. And I think this deck is pretty good overall. The consistency scares me a little bit, and there's just a few changes that I would make to the list. So moving on to the next page here, we have Lugia VSTAR, how I am currently testing it for EUIC. Obviously, some cards could change before then, but this is how I am practicing with Lugia VSTAR before going to London. And the first change you'll see is we've cut down from a 4-3 Lugia VSTAR line to a 3-3 Lugia VSTAR line to make room for a Squawkabilly. Squawkabilly has that Squawk and Seize ability where on your first turn you may discard your hand and draw 6 cards. It's just another way to make the deck a little bit more consistent, get Archeops into the discard pile so that you can get that turn 2 Summoning Star. Now, the scary thing about it is we do play 17 special energies because the Cinchinos take so much energy to do their big attacks that we need to play 17 special energies, but it can be kind of scary if you open a hand with a lot of special energy in it, and sometimes you just can't Squawk and Seize that hand away. The other thing that I've changed is I've cut a Mist Energy for a Luminous Energy, and I've cut a Snorlax for a Radiant Charizard. I do think that Radiant Charizard is very good in this next meta. It can deal with a lot of basic EX attackers, your Raging Bolts, your Roaring Moons, your Iron Hands, those sorts of things. And Radiant Charizard is just a great single prize attacker against things like Goldengo and Chimpao as well. Later in the game, obviously, because of the text on Luminous Energy, you can only use this Radiant Charizard at the end of the game when your opponent has 2 prize cards or less remaining. But even then, it can swing that prize trade back in your favor. And so I think it's a really important card to include in this list. Other than those changes, everything is relatively the same. And I actually haven't had too many problems with Lugia getting set up. I think that is probably the main concern for most players, is the consistency of getting that turn 2 Summoning Star for double Archeops. But I do think that this deck is very strong, and it does seem to have a very favored Charizard matchup, and Charizard is expected to be one of the best decks of the format. I think it does have a favored Stall matchup, which is another deck that's supposed to be one of the best decks in the format. And I do think that it is favored into the Giratina V-Star deck, as well as some other decks. I do think it can struggle against Chimpao because of the fact that they can Iron Hands both your Cinchino, your Lumineon, and your Archeops all for 2 and 3 prizes respectively on the Lumineon and the Squawkabilly. They can use Iron Hands, Ampy very much, for 3 prizes. So that can be a little bit of a difficult matchup. And then the Goldengo matchup is interesting because you can one-shot the Goldengos with the Cinchinos and with the Radiant Charizard because of weakness. But you do have the threat of them using the Greninja to take 2 prizes on your Minchinos if you're not able to get them evolved very quickly. So definitely some interesting matchups for Lugia, but overall I do think that the deck is very strong going into the next format. And I wouldn't be surprised to see it be played quite a bit at EUIC. I don't expect it to be the biggest deck in the room, the biggest deck in the meta, but certainly a strong deck that I think you have to be prepared for going forward. So hopefully this video helps you have some ideas of how to play Lugia V-Star in the next format, maybe some ways to change the Champions League winning list to make it a little bit more consistent or to have some better attackers. And hopefully this just gives you a great idea of where to start for testing the Temporal Forces meta. But until then, we will see you next time with another decklist video, as well as the podcast going forward. So thanks for watching and stay tuned till next time.